Hi everyone. Today's blog post is going to be about displaying a dynamic list of data onto an in-text form. Now you're seeing a in-text form, and I haven't really customized it very much, but what we do have is if I jump to another tab, you actually see I have a list with 7,200 items in it. Now what I want to do is actually build a form so that people can actually pick a specific customer out of this list. Now having a drop-down list with 7,200 items in it is pretty much unusable. It doesn't make for a good user experience. It's probably going to take quite a while to load up, especially if you're looking at maybe querying a list that has 50, 100,000 items in it. Again, it's just going to make the user experience not as good as what you would really want it to be for someone filling in a form. Now, the one thing that I found is if I'm using something like this choice control here, right, you can see that it can be checkboxes, or you can actually configure it to be a drop-down list. Now, if this is pointing to, or even like a list lookup pointing to a SharePoint list, there's really no way to limit, put some sort of row limit on how much data we want to display in that list. So that if you wanted to do something like that, really what you'd have to look at is doing a little bit of coding, which is a little bit of JavaScript behind the form. Now, the problem with using JavaScript in this sort of scenario is that these controls here, like this choice control and also the SharePoint list lookup control right here, these are actually ASP.NET controls, and they're really not made to be updated with JavaScript. So really what you should be looking at is creating your own HTML control. Now, I don't mean actually building a custom control for in-text forms. What I'm talking about is if you look at this control right here, if I select it, you notice how even though I clicked on this, or even click on the button here, it's actually highlighted the whole thing. If I double click on this, you'll notice we're actually dealing with a rich text control. And a rich text control is just found under the general group of actions or controls that you have in in-text forms. So what we do with the rich text control is when you drag it on here, when you double click on it, you'll actually get a blank box here. When you select, click inside that box, all of a sudden you get all these new options on the ribbon. The one to look at is this edit source. Now edit source actually puts it into a HTML, almost like an HTML type design. So you can see all the HTML behind the scenes. Now you can see that I actually have a HTML select control, and I also have an HTML button. And the button is actually calling a little bit of JavaScript. Right, so we have a control called ID choose customer, and we have a button that will do something, and I'll go into that a little bit later. That's all really you have to do with this rich text control. Now what we want to do is we actually want to jump into the JavaScript part of the form. So we go into settings, and you have your custom JavaScript, and there it is there. What I'm going to do is actually bring up a little notepad where I've put my JavaScript together. Now there's not a whole lot to it. Now I've got a couple, several, I guess, global variables that I'm using. I'm actually calling a function as when I open up the form called fn_get_customers. If you look at what this JavaScript function does, is it's emptying out the drop-down list or the list box, and then we're calling another function. And I've actually made this function, this get items from list, a little bit generic, where I can actually specify what list I want to look at, what field I want to compare, the start text of it, and I'll use that potentially in a future post where I want to do some almost like some type ahead things, and also what I want to do for each item that I find based on the results of this query. Now if we scroll down to the fn get items from list, that's right here, we're getting the SharePoint client context. We're then getting the list based on the list name that we provide, so ours is going to be customers. We're putting together a camel query where you can see I'm actually comparing a field, and I'm actually looking at what it begins with. So each the field that I'm looking at, which happens to be title, I want to find all the items that have a title where the text actually begins with some piece of text that I put in. And then finally, we're actually calling this get items from list next page. This is actually where all the work is really done. We're calling the get items, we're loading the items into the context, and we're doing some asynchronous call to go through each of the results, and we're doing something with them. What we're actually doing is, if you have a look over here, is we're actually appending an option HTML node to our select HTML control. Right, so there's not too much to it. You can really make some generic JavaScript functions to really make it reusable later on. Now, when I click on preview, this will give me an idea of what's actually happened. You see the code has been run. It's actually come back with 10 items, right? 10 results from the JavaScript. What we're actually doing is at the very top, I've actually specified in the JavaScript that I want 10 results back, right? That's why I don't want to get too much information back. Now, jumping back to this, you notice in my rich text control, I had my list box. I also had a button here. Now, the button runs a little bit of JavaScript. If I show you what it's doing, it's actually just rerunning this function. Now, because we're keeping a position of the last item that we received from the result set, this actually allows me to jump to the next 10 results, right? Kind of like rerun the query and say, this time, start at this position. So this gives me the ability to do a little bit of paging. At the moment, I've only done it so that it goes front ways. So you'll see I've got customer 001 up to 0010. If I click on next, you see the next 10 items, and the next, and the next, and the next. So this gives me the ability to have a very dynamic form, and yet still have the ability to type some information into here, click on save, and off it goes. If I jump to my form. So what you actually saw me do is actually submit a preview form, which is not going to create an item. But what I'll do this time is actually say test, and select an item, click on save, and you can see my item is created. So you notice that there were no issues with it. Because it's an HTML control, you can customize it with JavaScript as you see fit. So yeah, very easy to do, and hopefully this will help you guys build more dynamic forms if that's something that you require.